Welcome to Monarchist Minute, Royalist News in the US of A. I'm Victor Smith. Tonight, we commemorate the anniversaries of the deaths of King Charles I of England, also known as Charles the Martyr, as well as Bonnie Prince Charlie, the man that led the Jacobite army in the Rising of 1745. To commemorate the death of Charles I, we will do a deep dive discussion into his trial and the concept of popular sovereignty. Joining me today are Darth Kilhoun as well as Charles York. Charles, you will lead us off.
Well, being the resident Jacobite, I say tonight's the perfect time to get out the old Scottish whiskey. But anyways, you know, I don't know why that accent didn't sound Scottish at all. But anyways, so the trial of Charles I, aka the biggest sham in British legal history up to that point, I dare say. Oh boy. So the whole notion of whether or not a king can be tried for for crimes underneath the law that he is supposed to be the temporal law that he's supposed to be the source of is obviously ridiculous. The trial itself, obviously, I say that obviously a lot, was a sham, given that that you can't charge a king for treason if the definition of treason is literally, going against the king of your state, which is what the definition of treason was at the time. So how those parliamentarians squared the circle on that one, I don't know. The whole thing obviously was la sham, and there is the whole, and I think trying to speak more coherently, because I know I've lost 50% of the audience on YouTube already. No, so I mean the what really, the precedent that wasn't fully set by this trial, but certainly would be reinforced later with the rest of the Jacobite ethos, which is why Charles I and the whole English Civil War sort of been lumped into the whole Jacobite ethos, despite it not being directly related. Is the precedent is that the people can disrupt the legitimate monarchy. And this is sort of a dangerous precedent, because what the parliamentarians tried to do was get rid of the monarchy, but at their best, what the parliamentarians tried to do was subject the monarchy to the parliament. And how the English system was supposed to work, and how it still hypothetically works to this day in theory, is that the monarch derives his and her or her right to rule from God, and then the parliament derives its right to rule not from the people, but from the monarchy. So the best, quote unquote, of the parliamentarians who wanted to keep the monarchy around but just restrict the power of the monarchy, uh, they wanted to upset this notion and, popular sovereignty and all that jazz or whatever. And of course, the radical parliamentarians kind of just, won out in the end and just tried to do away with the whole system by beheading Charles I. Of course, we have the Restoration later, so that's a relatively happy end to that immediate chapter of British history. But what England and Scotland and Ireland were like under that Republican interlude under Cromwell, who was essentially a dictator, Republican dictator, it wasn't fun. Christmas was banned, obviously, but the Irish. If there's one thing that a British and Irish nationalists can agree upon, was Cromwell be kind of cringe, and for good reason, given what Cromwell did to the Irish, because Cromwell was one of those Puritan types, and well, the Irish were good, loyal Catholics. Sad past tense is sad. So yeah, that's what I had to say in a very jumbled way that I should have prepared more, since I knew that we were going to be doing this for at least 2 weeks. Anyone else wanna touch Darth?
So I ultimately view this as one of the times in history where it was the classic revolt by the middle class against the warrior caste that has the legitimate right to rule by God. Merchants should always be kept away from power. That's ultimately what Cromwell was at the end of the day. He might have not been actually a merchant, but he was part of that middle class Strasse, that parliamentarian Strasse. And ultimately, if you're part of that middle class, it breeds this resentment to the ruling caste because they believe themselves to be intellectually superior to their own leadership. And they get hyper fixated upon that singular goal of outcompeting said leadership without understanding how to actually be a proper leader. And that's why he turned out to be a dictator after the execution of Charles I, who legitimately wanted to rule his kingdom as a legitimate warrior leader that kept his people safe and secure at all times, avoiding war, um, uh, minimizing taxation, minimizing government interference, and ultimately the Puritans, which Puritanism is the religious embodiment of middle class bourgeois attitudes of how things need to be done, which they are almost always very puritanical in their outlook and vision. So I just see it as a testament as old as time. Like you saw this back in ancient Rome, you saw this in France a century later, you and then you saw it in England at that time. And it always breeds more and more resentment from the lower classes, from the warrior caste, and the middle class, and just keeps on propelling this perpetual conflict between these groups that have existed throughout all time. So I kind of like took the more esoteric view of it, but also I do advocate that we all pray for Charles I that he died a Catholic and not die an Anglican. So that way he may be in paradise.
Yeah.
So and there's a question as to whether Charles I is actually a martyr or not, because we don't know whether in his heart he was Catholic or whether he was truly Protestant. We don't know, and I don't believe we can know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, yeah, I mean, obviously, I mean, I guess one way to know would be to, ask for miracles in his intercession, because, obviously that would mean that, that he's Catholic, and if there are any miracles in his intercession, then obviously that would mean that he's Catholic, and that would be a very, very interesting process of getting him canonized in the Catholic Church. But the whole thing, and why I'm hesitant to call him a martyr, as much as I love Charles I, as probably um it just I don't know. He said that he died a member of the Church of England, but normally what was customary to say was die a member of the Protestant Church of England or whatever. So I mean, there's that, but I mean, it's just unless we actually have any concrete evidence at the last that he's like, yay, pro Roman, But I will say that Charles I, even if he didn't get there in the end, so whatever his eternal rewards may have been in that case, he did start a process that saw until the glorious revolution, um, that would see the rights of Catholics start to be respected, because apparently he let some of the priests that were Catholic priests that were in jail when he ascended to his reign. He couldn't just let them out of jail, but he did let them wander around London and do whatever they needed to do during the day, and they on the condition that they came back to the prison at night, living it up in the Hotel Tower, London. But anyways, 1635. Anyways, um so and obviously the fact that his son Charles II would convert on his deathbed, and obviously James II was a Catholic, and the rest of the main Stuart line before it unfortunately died out was Catholic. So uh, I don't
Not
know.
only were they Catholic, Henry, known to Jacobites as Henry the Ninth, was the Cardinal Archbishop of York.
Yes, because yeah, the Jacobite line. It didn't die in glorious combat, but it did die about as well as if your line is going to die out, having it be with be with the last man in it, be a cardinal is a pretty good well, not excuse, but
I mean, he also did prevent Napoleon from seizing the papacy, so there is that.
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Cardinal.
yeah, he held a well. The Napoleon specifically wanted to essentially made a coup d'état on the papacy by forcing a pope that would have been friendly to him be elected, but that cardinal, the last Jacobite, he prevented that by holding a secret election out of Napoleon's view and elected a new pope that was pretty anti-Napoleonic.
Mm. And just another note on Cardinal Henry Stewart. Um, when America became independent, we obviously didn't have a bishop. Um, but traditionally, what had been done was that the appointments of bishops to to the British Empire, right, when Empire were done by the Pope, obviously, but under the recommendation of Cardinal Henry. So, but when America became independent, for some reason, and I don't know why, I don't know who the Pope was at the time, but he went off the recommendation of of Benjamin Franklin for then Father Carroll to become our first bishop. And I look, not being the judge of the living and the dead, I don't want to just outright, say that
Actually,
Archbishop Carroll.
Charles, I heard that the Pope that either the Pope or Franklin allowed the priests of Baltimore to vote,
Oh,
but
so
I don't know off the top of my head who ordered it, but I do know that a vote took place.
yeah, well, I don't know. I think I remember reading something about that, but Puritan's Empire is most recent in my mind, and it was Charles Columbus said that
Well,
Benjamin Franklin.
Of course, Mr. Cologne could be correct.
Yeah. Well, anyways, either way, the point I'm trying to make here is that we had uh we had a guy who was from what admittedly little I know of him, was pretty great at selecting appointments. And for some reason, they didn't. He wasn't allowed to make the Episcopal appointment for America when she became independent. And had he been allowed to do that, I think that the American Catholic hierarchy would have been much better off, given the unfortunate caliber and a lot of the Americanist bishops that we've had. Like with Carroll, um, not only did he sort of advocate for as much autonomy for the American Catholic Church as possible, essentially turning it into an equivalent of the Episcopalians to the Anglicans, but the prayers that he had after mass for the leadership of the country, because we used to have prayers for the country's leadership and the kings after mass. Funny enough, I wonder why we stopped doing that. But anyways, um, the prayer that was said
The
was just
President,
like,
Church, and civil authorities.
well, yeah, no. I mean, but the prayer that was said didn't mention nothing about conversion, like saying we pray that the leadership converts, because the leadership at the time was all Protestant. Well, not all Protestant, but essentially almost down to a man. The leadership of our country, because it was 98%, 99, yeah, 98.9% Protestant or whatever, with like 0.1% Jew and then 1% Catholic, um, it was essentially all Protestant. And I'm like, it's like, come on, man, you gotta work on converting your fellow countrymen. Why couldn't Cardinal Henry been allowed to pick somebody? I don't know. Anyways,
So, with that little rant over, let's discuss what the people and the and the activist judges did in that trial, because those activist judges are the spiritual predecessors to what we have in the Supreme Court today.
I mean, the judiciary element in any government is ultimately one of the most. I honestly, I'm pretty anti-bourgeois, so I'm going to say that the courts are naturally bourgeois by their nature, naturally very intellectual, and because of that, they believe that they deserve supreme authority instead of a warrior caste like a king. So they always try to exert their authority over them, and that's why they judged Charles I so harshly. Is because, by the way, if any of you haven't really read on like the origins of monarchy, monarchy is essentially the head of the warrior caste, and aristocracy are like officers in the warrior caste of a society. And by that extent, they make the natural leadership of any civilization. Um, if you read like Plato and Aristotle, they talk about this a lot, even back in ancient Greece. And several philosophers after them. You can pretty much go to most sources, and they'll always say that yes, monarchies are always derived from warriors.
And I mean, the thing with the judiciary, especially in England, was that the judiciary was supposed to just be the king essentially delegating his ultimate judicial authority on matters to lower courts, obviously, because the king can't decide in every single case, every single civil case and legal, case and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, but the judiciary, as it existed at the trial, obviously, was more of a institution of the parliamentarians, and the whole thing was a complete sham. Like, one of the people, I can't remember which one, but there was one person in the jury or whatever who refused at the last to go along and vote to execute the king, and he stood up and saying that how this is all wrong or whatever. And when the court reconvened, his seat was conveniently empty. So yeah, I don't know what happened to him after that, but the the monarchy, when the monarchy isn't in charge of the judiciary, and we can see this in our own Supreme Court of today, where the Supreme Court in Mulberry versus Madison usurped the
Marbury,
right.
not Mulberry.
I say
Marbury.
Mulberry. And look, I don't know. I'll pretend it's a Michiganian pronunciation thing, so that way that nobody can say I got it wrong. But anyways, and Mulberry,
Marbury.
Marbury versus
Yes.
Madison, the Supreme Court usurped the right of constitutional review, and now these
From whom?
from the Senate, I believe, according to Puritan's Empire. Apparently, it was the Senate who, because we have to remember that the Senate, because the U.S. Because the United States are a collection of the states, and the Senate was supposed to be the representative of the states themselves, which is why the senators used to be picked by the state governments, whereas the House of Representatives was supposed to be representative of the rabble of this country. Um, so it was the Senate, given that the states were supposed to be ultimately in charge of the Union, and the Union was formed by their consent into forming this grander republic. That they were supposed to be in charge, but then 1819 comes around, and the Supreme Court says, "You know what? I think I'm going to get to decide." Which is sort of interesting because in the UK, the courts never really formed themselves out as a official third branch of government. The courts are to this day just controlled by Parliament, because obviously we
Well,
can't
now
let the
they
monarchy do anything.
today they are though.
Yeah.
Today, Tony Blair, when he was prime minister, made them essentially the third branch of government.
Man, They're just
Everybody hates Tony Blair in England, by the way, for all those American audiences.
well, essentially that's our entirety of our audience. We picked up one Australian viewer. I think he's pretty dedicated. So
G'day, mate.
G'day, mate. So yeah, we're very. Gee, you think Monarchists of America is catering to a primarily Anglo audience? I wonder how we could have foreseen that.
Anyway, let's go back to the actual trial itself. They were making the king the king was making them say by whose authority they were trying him, and they couldn't really give him a good answer.
Oh
But they
yeah,
still pressed on anyway because reasons.
yeah. They could not establish the authority of they don't have a lawful authority because the king is supposed to be the person ultimately in charge of these matters, and so they can't. And the king never gave up his right and never acknowledged the court as legitimate, right? Had Charles I been like, okay, this court that's trying me is totally legitimate, then yeah, the court would have been legitimate because he said so. But he never acknowledged its legitimacy. So the whole trial, legally speaking, is sort of null and void, regardless of the real world ramifications. But, obviously, I don't think the parliamentarians cared about law because if they did, then there wouldn't have been an English Civil War, now would there?
I mean, at the end of the day, nobody cares about legality, legitimacy, or anything if you have an agenda. Like, honestly, I recommend everybody read Machiavelli's The Prince because he goes into this dynamic of power. Like, yes, technically speaking, the king is where these judges derive their authority, but these judges derive their power from the parliament. They use that power from the parliament to exercise authority over the king himself. So,
And we should probably touch on that issue of popular sovereignty. What, like, I understand how popular sovereignty is popular, but why was popular sovereignty sort of allowed to fester in the people of England? Why was there no real incentive to put a stop to popular sovereignty?
I mean, popular sovereignty pops its toxic head up all the time in civilizations. It's just kind of like it's a cycle of civilizations in general where they go through this age where the people become so decadent that they go through this age of popular sovereignty where they believe that the sovereignty of the state is derived from them and not from any higher, more metaphysical power, like say God, or from some more higher temporal authority like a king, but instead drives itself from them. So then they get this idea that we should be in charge. Most of the time, it always comes from the middle class. If you look throughout history, um, so these toxic elements get into a civilization. They degrade it down to a level, which that's why I say ever since the Protestant Reformation, the West has been in the decline because the Protestant Reformation, especially in England, has always been predicated upon the popular sovereignty of the people to determine their own faith, which then transformed itself into popular sovereignty over their nations and over their states, and then popular sovereignty over their own lives, which is more what you're seeing today. It's this cycle. Rome went through the same cycle in their decline in the last 200 years. And you're just seeing it again play out here. So it's just a natural element of human civilization in general.
Speaking of human civilization in general, we would like to wish Justice Stephen Breyer of the United States Supreme Court the best in his retirement. Let's go over, and I think, so I've heard some chatter among people stating that some of the public on social media want Breyer's replacement to be somebody that has maybe served time as a public defender. Anyway, they want a real leftist to replace him. And it
So
wouldn't exactly upset the balance of the court to have a leftist replace him because, well, reasons.
Well, this is when it comes to the legitimacy of when it comes to the Supreme Court. The problem with the Supreme Court, no matter whether or not it's ruled by conservatives, quote unquote, who are just old school liberals, or current liberals, is at best they will mildly follow what's in the Constitution upholding gun rights or whatnot. But the problem is that I cannot think of any federal legislation that has been wholly struck down recently by the courts. The courts exist primarily to justify, regardless of who ultimately controls them, to justify whatever the federal government's particular mode of expanding power is at the moment. They seem more content to strike down state and local things, which that precedent, well, that precedent has been going on since before the Civil War, but really the thing with the civil rights movement and southern states resisting the forced integration because they felt that it was unconstitutional. And that the people who were opposed to forced integration were in two camps. You had the actual racists who didn't want integration under any circumstance, and then you had the people who thought that they would like to see integration, right? But they didn't feel that the federal government had the power to do it. So you had that resistance to that forced integration that was enforced by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, I think, has used that. Well, the states trying to uphold them rights was used in a bad way once, so we're just going to use that as an excuse to stomp on the states whenever they try to step out of line from the federal program. Uh, so
But I think that like this just all of the news coverage surrounding the Supreme Court has me thinking, why do we need a balanced political Supreme Court?
we don't.
Shouldn't these guys be scholars of the law and experts in the Constitution and look at things through the lens of our constitutional document, which warts and all? Like,
Okay, so
Well,
this goes into the idea of like the fallacy of liberalism, which the United States is literally founded upon the ideals of classical liberalism. The ideals of liberalism is as it sounds, it's an ideal. And ideals are always flawed in nature because it's always in the human imagination and never in reality. In reality, the natural ruling class is warriors. In the liberal, fictitious world, it is ruled by the middle class and intellectuals, which they go hand in hand in all times. Um, uh, so in this ideal world, they always want like an ideal Senate. Ideally, the Senate will represent the state's interest. Ideally, the House Representatives will represent the people's interest. Ideally, the president will be this humble and what's the word I'm looking, benevolent executive that will only intervene in the interests of the state. Um, uh, all these predications are bent on idealism and never in reality. In reality, they always serve as a power function. And if you look at all these components of government are given their own powers, and then they learn how to exploit said powers and expand upon them even beyond their own on paper jurisdiction. Like on paper, the Supreme Court is supposed to be the check on the executive and legislative branch that they don't go outside the confines of classical liberalism. But in reality, the Supreme Court is just a check on the states not getting any funny ideas about going against the status quo and not going along with the federal pause, the pause of the ideas of globalism, liberalism, and idealism of civil rights. And then you go over
well,
to the
well,
it's a
sorry.
I mean, I could monologue all day. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this just all boils down to, in my personal opinion, the Supreme Court declined to allow a case in which it has original jurisdiction. If you remember, some states sued other states with regard to the 2020 presidential election, and the Supreme Court declined to hear the case. I believe the court has original jurisdiction over that type of case, and they declined to hear it. I disagree with them declining to hear it. Now, if they want to hear the case and side with the defendants, then that's fine, but they should have at least had to hear the case because they have original jurisdiction.
Well, no. The reason they didn't do that, I'm gonna get a little conspiratorial here, but I think I'm right, is that had the ultimately if the defendants lost, that would have been a bad thing for the regime, the federal government. But more importantly, there would have been American quote unquote conservatives don't riot. We're too well mannered to take to the streets and actually do anything. I'm not saying burn down people's shops. That's
Controlled
bad.
opposition.
Yeah, controlled opposition. But if they had done that, there would have been, if they had taken up the case and rejected the people and rejected and just sided with the defendants, I think there would have been a lot of opposition. Now, when this happened originally, back so long ago now, man, that's so long ago. When this happened originally, I thought that there would have been more opposition. There would have been a lot of opposition when the Supreme Court turned down the case. But looking back, I feel like they made the smart move by not taking up the case, because if they took up the case, it probably would have become it may have become a media fiasco, and people get really upset. You see, the amount of anger that people feel over a certain thing, there's a direct correlation to the amount of time that it's seen in like national media. It's funny how that works. If
Well,
you
Oh, yeah.
you're seeing the same thing in every single liberal regime across the world. Mostly the nations that have been under the sway of the United States for ever since the end of World War II, which was kind of our founding myth in this new liberal world. Like you see this in England, especially. Like in England, it's been more transparent because, well, one, they're a fellow English-speaking country and you can observe their politics really easily. But like I hear talk about this all the time in British politics of how like the British Parliament will announce that they're deliberately talking about some sort of very controversial topic. They'll get the state-controlled media, aka the BBC and other news outlets like The Guardian, to publish headlines and get people outraged for a short time. They'll fight on the internet. They'll debate. They'll bicker amongst just average people that have no power over the government, have no power inside the government. And once it finally dies down and just turns into a closed case, the parliament will conveniently vote on it and pass it, even though it has popular outrage and popular dislike. That's just the nature of politics in these liberal regimes. They always do these things where they publish something that will get outrage, let it fester, let it die down, and then they pass it while people are not looking and they're focused on a different thing.
Or in the case of the infrastructure bill, they'll have so many bullet points that nobody could realistically cover them all, and everybody focuses on the main points. Which the infrastructure bill is just why. But some of the interesting provisos is that in the next few years, it will be mandated that cars have to have things to make sure that you aren't driving the car whilst you're impaired, and how that's going to work, I'm not sure, obviously. But that doesn't seem sketch and authoritarian at all. Like the government's gonna have a direct line to check in on your car whenever they want. Like,
It's really strange.
I mean, I don't. I don't. I mean, like, I sound so conspiratorial, but I'm like, you know what? Maybe I need to get a car that was made before cars just became computers that had wheels. Not like that Mac that had $900 wheel accessories.
So, I mean, this comes down to Machiavelli wrote about this even back in the 1500s, where a ruler that has to fear his people has no power at all. So, really, like all these liberal regimes, they're putting all these measures in place because the people still have in their mind that they have authority and that they have power. But as soon as these cracks start to form, you get like any regime that's under threat becomes defensive. And this is ultimately a defensive move, is trying to control people's movement, controlling people's speech, controlling what they put in their bodies, aka I'm not going to talk about the medicine on this podcast. But it's various defensive moves to try to keep the people curtailed, kept down, and believing that the institutions still have the power. Machiavelli wrote that if you need to do that, you have already failed. Your principality will fall. A principality that is strong is one where the ruler can go down into his people and live with them instead of fearing them. So that's a big point. There's a lot of wisdom in reading Machiavelli's works. I know people demean him and demonize him, but in reality, he was just trying to make points about how power works.
If
And
Nancy
speaking
Pelosi
of,
moves into my block, she's not going to get invited to the barbecue. And it's not just because we don't have one.
Nancy Pelosi would. I would imagine Nancy Pelosi would sooner have a reason to come to my block for a barbecue because she's actually. Fun fact: Nancy Pelosi is actually from Baltimore.
That's not.
So
So what you're saying is that your city has produced. You see, this is the good thing about living in a city like mine that's on the decline. There's less of a chance that you'll produce people that you'll be embarrassed by.
And well, Baltimore has a lot of people to be embarrassed by, like Nancy Pelosi, Barbara Mikulski, who a lot of national people don't really know. Both of them graduated from Notre Dame Prep, I believe the school was called. Notre Dame Prep was an all-girls Catholic school. It was built inside the building that they were in housed a station on the Underground Railroad. And a couple of years ago, Pelosi, who was Nancy D'Alessandro when she went to Notre Dame Prep, and Mikulski are both alumni of Notre Dame Prep. Neither of them lifted a finger to help give money to the school to prevent them from closing their doors.
Well, we can't. What do you expect, that they'd be a part of the alumni? So I mean, I don't know. I mean, not that. I mean, I don't know. Not knowing what was going on.
Well, to give you more of a clue, Notre Dame Prep student body, about 80 or something percent were not paying full tuition. They were on some type of scholarship, whether it was need-based or whatever. So that might have had something to do with it as well. But anyway, let's get off the topic of spamming against Nancy Pelosi, and let's get on the topic of spamming somebody else we could be spamming, and that is the guy called George the Second. Was it George the Second?
Well, the guy, the that usurper Hanoverian from the 45. Yeah, his brother was a Culloden.
Yes. Let's talk about let us switch gears here and say, may Charles the First enjoy his reward.
Whatever it may be.
And wait. Okay, I've just read something. Pardon me, ladies and gentlemen. I just read a story from the BBC that a Canadian Catholic priest gave Holy Communion to someone's dog as an act of welcome to the owner of said dog, who apparently took that dog to Mass.
So So,
No, no,
yeah.
no. You can't. You can't. No, stop it. No, you.
Well, fortunately, the Canadian priest has apologized.
He doesn't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry here. Okay, he should know better than anyone else in that parish what the Eucharist is. He should know that dogs don't have rational souls and therefore are and aren't really included in the whole thing. He should know all of that.
So
Why
okay.
would you?
So
Mm,
so did okay. First off, let's analyze what Canada is. Canada is a product of neoliberal world order. They are a heavily Protestantized nation because they were part of said British Empire that had Protestantism ultimately is the rejection of any theology. So, like, if you look at the Catholic Church in any Anglo nation, including the United States, you always see this problem where you have these priests that come out with wacky ideas because, frankly, they live in nations where wacky ideas is the theology. So the the fact that a Canadian Catholic priest serving the Eucharist, one, does not surprise me in the slightest because he is surrounded by enemies that wish to corrupt his soul and corrupt his mind. And the human mind, even of a priest, is susceptible to manipulation by external forces. So that's what I would chalk it up to. Um, blame the Protestants, guys. Even though it was a Catholic priest that did it, indirectly it was the Protestants that made him do it.
And let's
Protestants are just. Mm,
anyway, let's move on from that topic. I wanted to talk about it because it was put that article was put in our server, and I just saw it, and I felt compelled
Right.
to talk about it. Now let's get to our main event. Uh, the Jacobite Rising of 1745 and the precursors to all of those things. Let us discuss. Let us discuss this. We will start with the so-called Glorious Revolution of Cromwell in 1688, and
no,
then
not
with
Cromwell.
not a Cromwell. Okay,
The revolution of the glorious revolution of Parliament against
okay,
Cromwell was dead.
okay. Okay. So thanks for the correction. Charles York, a resident Jacobite historian, will now give us the entire history of the Jacobite cause and what it stands for, etc., as a commemoration of Bonnie Prince Charlie, whose anniversary of his death we celebrate
On today,
this
the
week.
31st. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, so when we last left off in our narrative of 20 minutes ago or whatever, that long distant time, long since forgotten, we had the trial of Charles I and against Parliament, and that conflict, though the Restoration happened and the Republican experiment in Britain was put to rest, at least visibly, with the Restoration. That tension between Parliament and the monarchy never truly went away. So Charles II was a pretty popular king, but he but the Parliament still was agitated against him, going so far as to there was even a plot at one point to make sure that to coup him because his brother James II, who was a Catholic at this point, would inherit the throne, and they totally didn't want that. So there was always this tension between Parliament and the monarchy, but it seemed as if the royal prerogative over Parliament was still there, and that hypothetically you could build back. Now, Charles the Second never had any legitimate children. He did have one who kind of keeps illegitimate child, whose name I can't remember, who keeps popping up.
Charlotte.
No, it was
Charlotte.
a son. It was a son. He keeps popping up.
Oh,
Uh,
sorry. Oh, sorry. We're not there yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Continue.
No, no. So he has this illegitimate son who keeps popping up. trying to take over make sure his uncle doesn't get on the throne or whatever. But so we get to Charles James II. So he takes over after his brother dies and converts to Catholicism on his deathbed. So that's good for him. Um, uh, and with that, the Parliament is ever more against the king, because James II was Catholic and he was doing things to try to he. As far as I'm aware, there wasn't any public action on his behalf to try to bring the Church of England back into line with Rome, although I'm sure he would have wanted that. Um, but he did, force all the priests or bishops in the Church of England to read out a statement saying, "Hey, Catholics are people too," essentially. So Parliament was very much against this, and everything that he was doing, any assertion of the royal power, was an affront to Parliament in the eyes of Parliament, obviously. So, but they were content to leave the situation as is, with a Catholic monarch in charge, so long as his Protestant daughters, who Charles II, before he converted to Catholicism on his deathbed, obviously forced to be raised Protestant, so long as the Protestant daughters would be in line for succession. But until recently, and this change in the law is still invalid in my opinion, males, regardless of how old they are the firstborn male is always preferred to anyone else, even if his sisters are older. So
You mean primogeniture?
yeah, so male primogeniture, essentially. So
And by the way,
James,
that change was passed in, I think, 2011.
yeah,
Which which Parliament has no authority to change
to do,
succession
yeah,
laws.
yeah. We'll get into that later. So James II has his second wife. His first one was dead, but his second wife is pregnant, and Parliament's
And
like,
is Catholic.
yeah, yeah. So and now that James is in charge, he can raise his kids Catholic, as he ought to. Everybody in Parliament's like, oh, this isn't good, and then the child's born. Also named James, and it's a boy, and Parliament's like, well, that ain't good. And so essentially, they're like, we gotta act fast. So they essentially invite James's Protestant daughter, Mary, to invade with her Dutch hubby, William.
Mhm.
And that is the Glorious Revolution of 1688.
Yes.
And there were several attempts. Uh, there was the Williamite Wars in Ireland to retake the throne, and throughout the years there were Jacobite uprisings in 1715, 1717 or 19, and the biggest one was this Jacobite uprising in 1745, and that unfortunately led by
Charles,
Prince Charlie.
Charles, I wanted, sorry to cut you off, Charles, but we got a comment in our VC text chat from Brian Boru, excuse me. If he heard right, Parliament never even talked to the Windsors before they changed the rules.
You just well, we'll get into that later.
Yes, we will
No,
get
I
into
mean,
that later. Continue.
it's important to
1745
look
Jacobite
like,
Rising.
yeah, and it's important really to look at what Jacobitism was as an ideology in of itself, because if you're an outside observer, you might think that there's just a conflict between two different branches of the family or whatever, and two different branches of the family, but that wasn't the case, right? So Jacobites obviously believed that royal that the king was supreme, was over the parliament, obviously, because the parliament deposed James II, which is not cool. So this is why people who support the Windsors, or anybody after any Hanoverians or Windsorites or whatever, who support royal supremacy over parliament, are a little are essentially stating an oxymoron, because if you take that to its natural conclusion, then your people who you're saying should be over parliament wouldn't be there, because parliament put them in charge in the first place. Well, in charge, quote unquote. But Jacobitism stood for royal power local liberties, and this was seen because after the usurpation of 1688, eventually in 1701, the crowns of England and Scotland were merged into Great Britain. And the Scottish were very upset about this because now they're being ruled over by some people in London who they
Well,
obviously.
the crowns of England and Scotland were de facto unified.
Well, yeah, but the problem was, well, not the problem. The crowns have been united since the ascension of James I. But the problem is, not the problem. Scotland retained a separate parliament, and England retained a separate parliament. So with the union of the two kingdoms into one, so with the union of the two kingdoms, so before this there was a kingdom of England, a kingdom of Scotland, and a kingdom of Ireland, all three ruled over by the same dude with all the same succession laws. What happened was that Great Britain was now one kingdom, and the Scots were not very pleased about this because it meant that they were now being ruled by some guy foreign and some dudes in the parliament who were foreign and far away from them. So Jacobitism, as an ideology, stood for more local liberties and devolving power to the local level, where Parliament, as sort of the template for modern liberal states, wanted to centralize power in London, right? So the Whigs who were in charge of Parliament were the ones who created the Bank of England and the ones who tried to centralize all power in London, which is why there were in England a lot of the Jacobite support was rule because they were distrustful of institutions like the Bank of England.
Based.
Reject central banks, embrace royal mint. But so they were distrustful of institutions like the Bank of England. So Jacobitism essentially has a sort of Catholic concept. It's very in line with this Catholic concept of subsidiarity, or subsidiarity. That's all there. Yeah, where problems should be solved on the localist level possible, right? So the idea that there shouldn't be a federal commission for repairing your fence, right? That should be a problem that you take care of, you and your neighbor take care of, right? Um, so Jacobitism was very much in line with that. So it was very decentralized, even to the point that the usurpers' union between England and
Scotland.
Scotland would be ended, and Ireland would be autonomous, right? Ireland would be taking orders from the king, not from England's parliament, right? Because essentially, from my understanding, Ireland's parliament was essentially just rubber stamping legislation that London wanted them to do. So and Ireland's parliament was made up of the Protestant minority, and I think was a bunch of imported Englishmen, anyways. So that conflict between Jacobitism and this sort of liberalism really was a continuation of essentially the English Civil War, except this time the parliamentarians had disguised themselves as being uh yeah, I'll get to it. Another oh shoot, my train of thought derailed, so I'll just I'll answer this question because there was a question that was posed to me that's been pointed out, so I lost my train of thought. The foolishness of the national parties running excess, doesn't that mean that localism is just global homo on a cheap and our current? Well, so essentially, so the question that was asked is that because of the national parties running the Scottish and Welsh parliaments, does that mean it's just global homo on the cheap in our current situation?
It is global.
It is, but the thing is that those parties are not. They're not. I mean, essentially, they're just doing what London's doing, anyways. It's just that they're more. I mean, the Conservative Party in the UK has an LGBTQ wing, but the Scotland 1745 was different, even though it was still.
You were actually talking about how the king, the Irish Parliament was rubber stamping what the king wanted to do.
Well, not what the king wanted to do, but we were saying what London, like the Parliament in London, wanted to do. Okay. Anyways, so Jacobitism was for local liberties and for royal power. Obviously, also the Catholics, by and large, supported it because it meant that they wouldn't be living under that terrible Protestant regime.
And
But the conflict. Oh, I
and
was
we
about
must
to.
not And we must not forget that some Protestants
Oh yeah,
supported the Jacobite cause.
yeah. There wasn't Protestant support for the Jacobite cause. The Jacobite army would have been like 5 people and a cow. But um, reject Calvary, embrace Calvary, embrace cow. Anyways, um, but this conflict between um Calvary, the conflict between this Jacobitism was and this parliamentarianism, which was disguised as somewhat monarchism, because there was a king, guys. His father may not have been able to speak English, and this guy doesn't really, and this guy doesn't, want to stand up to Parliament. But we support the monarchy, yay, Um, this conflict is really a continuation of, and helped decide the fate of the English speaking world at the time. Um, and while the English and the the Jacobites losing the 1745 rebellion, and the subsequent fact that there wasn't any subsequent real, Jacobite hurrahs to reclaim the throne yet, is is the reason why we are in this situation now in the English speaking world. And it 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 wouldn't have been, as I'm sure some people would think, just taking a cursory glance. It wouldn't have been the same old situation in that we had in our timeline, just with a different branch of a family in charge, right? This would have been fundamentally the best thing that could have realistically happened to Britain at that point in time. The 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 rights of the church, the Catholic Church probably wouldn't have become majority in any reasonable sense, but at the very least, you would have had a Britain that that was a stalwart in its ideology against against the sort of, more open liberalism that would arise that had arisen during the Enlightenment. And when it came to things like maybe a French Revolution, which may not have happened, given that, England may not have been, the 7 Years' War might not have happened, because the Stuarts probably may not have been pro-French had they gotten charged, but they certainly wouldn't have been angling to undermine the French every chance they got, like the Hanoverian regime did. But
French nominally supported the Stuarts and
oh well,
the
yeah,
in the West.
well, yeah. So the French, the reason the French did it, I would say that it was because of the goodness of their heart and trying to put a Catholic on the throne. The reason they did it, if I'm being a little pessimistic, is because they knew that the Parliament in England wanted all the colonies and all that, and that every single chance the English got to undermine the French in North America or wherever else, they would take it. And with the Stuarts on the throne, they would be less liable to do that. I don't think that anybody would realistically expect an alliance between. I think Cardinal de Fleury was the one in charge at the time. I don't think he was realistically expecting England to just become a stalwart ally of France. But at the very least, they wouldn't have been as pushy as they were in our timeline. So but
Anyway,
So just posing this, like, France could have had double motives. I'm just saying, like, you can have more than one motive
oh
on
yeah,
supporting issues. Which I hate this analogy. Like, historians do this all the time, where they say, "Well, it was because of this reason that I did this," and it's like then another historian will be like, "Well, it's actually because of this reason," and it's like you can
you can
make
do
the
both.
analogy that it could be like multiple reasons why somebody does something, because that's what we do in our own lives, and intellectuals always forget that. That's why
Mm.
I'm very anti-intellectual, even though I am kind of an intellectual.
You're one of the
I, I,
greatest
I'm
enemy of intellectuals, other
I,
intellectuals.
I'm like a Julius Evola, where technically he had the title doctor, but he rejected it because it was too bourgeois and intellectual.
Um, Let's get us into hot water with somebody. Anyway, uh, but but I mean, I've said this in way too many words, but essentially Jacobitism was the closest thing that Britain was going to get to a true Catholic monarchy in terms of its how it would function, because you would have the subsidiarity, you would have power in the nobility, um, presumably you would have the local rights and privileges respected by the people. In England today, the city police can't just crush a student protest if it's occupying part of the town. They can't just the city government can't just send in the police. They have to get it right off from the member of parliament. So if the member of parliament supports the student protest, well, I guess you're not having it. I guess your shops aren't going to be open for the next week or whatever, or however long they decide to do that. So that's nice. But had Jacobitism won, the English speaking world, I think, besides inevitably probably being more Catholic, and maybe even no, and maybe even maybe heck might have been England might not have been lost to the faith as it is now, and may have been reconverted. But I
I,
don't know.
I have more faith in England actually converting to Catholicism these days because of its. If you've seen the decline of the Anglican Church and the more rise of Anglo Catholicism, it's actually pretty white pilling in a sense because even though England is going through this Islamization, it's like ultimately like it's just kind of like in the United States where immigrants like the first generation and maybe the second generation are holding on to their let's just say more aggressive Islamic stance. Much of the third generation abandoned Islam entirety. So I don't think as if the Islamization of England is going to end, Anglo Catholicism will probably supersede the place of the Anglican Church in near time. Well,
Well,
relatively near time.
I feel like what's going to happen is because obviously Anglo Catholicism is just very high church Anglicanism. What's going to happen eventually is that the low church Anglicans or whatever are just going to I mean they've already essentially gone full wokery with female clerics and all that nonsense, but I I just I feel like the goals of some of the most radical, I guess, of the Anglo Catholics is going to be fulfilled, and at least part of the Church of England is going to convert, but it's not. It's going to be very, very messy because technically everything is the property of the government. So it's like, oh, that the government's going to have to sign off on that, and I highly doubt Parliament's just going to rescind the Act of Supremacy. Although,
Let us go back to the actual Jacobite rising and talk about the key events in 1745. Charles, why don't you?
oh well, so you have the landing at shoot, I forget the landing, but you have the battle. The So by Prince Charlie, he comes in, gets a lot of people. Yeah, he takes Edinburgh. Um, he fights a battle briefly. I think it's over in like 15 minutes. The Battle of Preston, where it's like the
Just
first
in
major.
hands.
Well, Preston Pans, Preston. It's been pronounced either way, but Preston Pans. They Government forces are smashed in like 15 minutes. It's a Gale time, but there's concern among a lot of the Jacobite army leadership about French support and whatnot. And Bonnie Pritchard is like, "Let's go, go, go!" So they go south, and they make it as far as I think Derry or Derby. I can't
Darby.
Derby in Derbyshire, and by Prince Charlie is like, "Let's go on to London." But the problem is because everybody was concerned because admittedly, Bonnie Prince Charlie was very young and he was not that experienced, technically. Is that they had a war council, and the war council, which was made up of men who admittedly were much more experienced in warfare than Prince Charlie was. The war council voted no, we should go back to Scotland and wait for French support that they thought was coming. It wasn't. Well, I mean, the French just couldn't get through the English blockade, and they weren't going to risk it. The British blockade, but they weren't. But it shows. But had Blind Prince Charlie gotten his way, and he had marched on from Derbyshire to London, he would have gotten there before the Duke of bother. How did I forget? The Duke of Cumberland. There we go. He would have gotten there before the Duke of Cumberland, and he would have been able to take the capital. Now, the French probably would have been a little more bold at that point, but and in supporting the English, and that probably would have had wider repercussions on the international scene, because it's like, hey, the guys took the rebels actually took the capital, yay! But because the only forces that were standing in the way between Bonnie Prince Charlie and London were the Black Watch, which had mutinied a couple of years earlier over slightly different reasons, but they were a Scottish unit, so they may have either just done nothing or went over to the Jacobite cause, and a few hastily thrown together militias. But obviously, the Jacobite intelligence network wasn't really particularly that strong, so there's that. So what happened is that they go back to Scotland, and this is what really dooms the 45 to failure, because the British government has time to reinforce and send in, and despite winning a battle at Falkirk Muir, um, it's really over, and then eventually we have the horrible day at Culloden, where Bonnie Prince Charlie's army is defeated, and unfortunately he has to go into hiding, and he would have come again, and he would have landed again, but nobody supported him after that point. And so a lot of people were embittered by that, when it really wasn't his fault, because he wanted to. He just didn't get the support from Spain or France or anybody. But I think that this shows, in terms of the whole warrior nature of nobility, Bonnie Prince Charlie's intuition was good. I mean, he had the right intuitions, right? Had he listened to, he did what on paper seemed like the sensible thing to do, and listened to the council, his war council, who was sort of a democratic body of the war leaders. He did that, and on paper that was the sensible thing to do. They had more experience, but he was right in his intuition to push on and do that, and I think that says something. You know, I guess Darth could maybe talk about that, but it's
Comment from Brian, by the way, while we wait for Darth. Well, there was a ship holding about 10,000 English pounds in metal coinage that was being sent from France. It got wrecked on the Scottish shore and were found and picked up by British government troops, apparently.
yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that the French didn't support them at all. I'm just saying that they weren't supporting them as much as I think that. I don't know. They really could have. I mean, I don't know. 10,000 pounds is a lot, especially back then, because our currency is so.
So hindsight's 2020.
Yeah,
I'll just remind everybody about that.
yeah. I'm not condemning Bonnie Prince Charlie's war council. It's just that moment where he turned back, and the army moved back is just, it's so, I don't know, there's just something about um these those moments where, obviously when you're living at them, when you're living through them, it doesn't seem like all that much or whatever, but when you step and look back, so the 45 is defeated, and after that, Jacobitism, it never dies, right? But Jacobitism really goes underground. It loses a lot of its popular support, and the ideals of the Toryism and all that really truly start to die away and whatnot. Uh, but the 1890s come around, and there's a neo-Jacobite revival, from which the predecessors of the modern Royal Stuart Society are formed, like the Order of the White Rose. Um, but the torch of Jacobitism, and it's important to know, that never went away. There were always people, as small as they may be, who always held to the legitimate throne. Um, but the unfortunate reality is, after the death of Cardinal Henry, the Cardinal Duke of York, it goes to the Italians through the Savoy line, and then
We should probably give the whole list of the line of succession and briefly talk about the Bonnie Prince's illegitimate daughter, just very briefly.
he had an illegitimate daughter. She was the only one that survived, and she has kids, but they're not legitimate, so that line doesn't actually
Correct.
count. But
Right.
so it goes through the
Now would be a good
Sardinia.
now would be a good idea to have that channel open in the other server
Yeah,
so you
yeah,
can
yeah. No.
list it.
Well, yeah. I mean, so it goes Charles the Fourth, Victor Emmanuel of Sardinia. The actual Mary the Second, because the Mary whose husband was William was usurper, so she doesn't count. Francis the First, Mary the Third, Robert the First, Albert, um, and Francis the Second, and Albert was the king of Bavaria, right? So there's um
Mm,
well,
I, I,
Robert
I,
was Robert.
I don't remember a king. Like the first king of Bavaria was a Ludwig, and then yeah, I don't remember an Albert of
Well,
Bavaria.
no,
Oh, oh,
Albert was Robert's successor. So no, you have Robert, I think, who was in charge. Well, Rupert, as they call him in Germany. He was the one who was. And the Jacobite society, the Neo-Jacobite societies during World War I had to shut down because the person they wanted to put on the throne was technically subject to the German emperor. Um, so that kind of that was a great way to get yourself sent to jail for treason. Um,
you mean Ruprecht?
if
Yes,
you want to go
yes,
with the
that is
German
what.
pronunciation,
Yeah.
that's on you.
Well, I mean, technically, like that was his name. I mean, like it doesn't matter if it's a German version or not. Like, if he would have taken the English throne, he would have still been Ruprecht.
He would have been
So,
Robert.
maybe if the English wanted to translate his name, but
Yeah, well,
he
that's normally what
he's
happens.
so. I mean, not necessarily all the time. I
Well,
mean,
I guess, but in the Jacobite, I guess, and
The
generally
line of
we just go with
succession.
generally we just anglicize the names, which is why we have Francis the Second as opposed to Franz. Um,
Anyway,
but so this is all very rambly,
why
but
why don't we go through the line of succession after the current Jacobite claimant?
currently we have Francis the Second, who unfortunately shows no interest in actually pursuing his claims, and he doesn't exemplify any of the ideals from which we Jacobites hold to, unfortunately. So after him, and the fact that he's gay, which is very, very disconcerting, but after which, and also explains why he never had any kids, um, a wife and kids. But after him, we have his brother, Max, daughter, then his daughter Sophie, and then Joseph, and then after him, her son Joseph, and then we have some of his brothers because Joseph doesn't have any kids yet. So, but they're the people who are in charge. The reigning people who will be coming up after will actually be in charge of a state, right? They'll actually be in charge of Liechtenstein, right? So unlike Francis, who's currently a unemployed nobleman in modern liberal Bavaria in Germany, coming
friend.
up, yes, coming up, we actually have people who in Liechtenstein, they actually the Grand Duke still has or is a Duke or Grand Duke? Anyways,
It's a prince.
No, it's a principality. So
oh
he's a prince.
Prince. Oh, okay, so
So
well the Prince has power.
here's a funny thing about Liechtenstein. It was at one point in time it was a constitutional monarchy with a parliament that ruled. But essentially, the parliament literally voted to give away their powers back to the monarch, and it made it an absolute monarchy again.
Which is just so base, and that's why, really think about it. It gives me hope.
I mean, also the Prince of Liechtenstein, while he was a still constitutional monarchy, the parliament wanted to bring abortion to Liechtenstein, and the Prince of Liechtenstein was like, "No, I'm disbanding parliament."
Base. No, I mean, and this is why it gives me hope, because right now, the British crown, it has no power. The rightful king in Great Britain, or rightful king over, I would argue I would contend the United States and the British Empire and all that. He has no power, and he's not really trying, I guess, to live up to the hopes and dreams of us Jacobites who were scattered across the Anglosphere.
He's not
Me as
even.
a Bavarian,
Yeah, he is.
I'm quite disappointed in the heir to the throne, but I
Go
have
ahead,
much hope
Dorf.
in Max. I'm just saying, as a Bavarian, it's kind of disappointing that the fact that we have a sodomite as the quote unquote heir to the throne. It's really disconcerting. Oh, and we lost Victor.
Oh, well, he'll probably be back. No, I mean, the real it is concerning right now, but here's what we had to remember. We're all kind of in a bad way, to use the old expression. Right now, society is very, very, I don't know, off balance or whatever. It's very out of whack. So what we have to do, and this is the same. I mean, obviously, I don't think it's as bad as our current beloved Jacobite line. I mean, I still say
Well,
God save King Francis II,
well,
but
of course, and there are actually, and I'm going to get into this in just a minute, but firstly, Francis II, he collects modern art. He doesn't even collect good art. He collects modern.
yeah. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, he's modern, and the thing we had to remember is that this is a problem among a lot of European nobility. I see who's Queen Elizabeth's Prince Charles, right? He's being a lot more based. His model village or whatever that he built had a lot of classical architecture in it. And the thing is that most of Europe's nobility has essentially just surrendered all of their power to the state, and because they've done that, and because they don't actually have to rule and reign, they 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 can become sort of like the rest of us. They're sort of allowed to be the sort of
So, okay, I was just reading a chapter from Revolt Against the Modern World, and it was Evola was talking about in that the degradation of society is when the princes don't take up the sword, but they take up the cocktail glass and cocktail tray instead, and wear elegant suits instead of wearing plates of armor. So that you can kind of see is like the fact that it's been the separation of the warrior caste from their actual role as warriors that has really degraded their soul. Because imagine if these princes were raised as actual princes. Like Franz wouldn't be collecting modern art. He would be a well-married man, a devout Catholic, and a stern king of Bavaria.
But in his
But no,
80s. Yeah.
well, no, he would have, yeah, and
And
that's the thing.
we should also point out that His Majesty the King and the Prince of Wales were both uh, imprisoned by the Nazis, along with the rest of the Bavarian royal family, which at that point was the rightful British royal family too.
Yeah, and I mean this is, I mean, this is the thing, right? You know, exchanging the sword for the for the cocktail glass, and it's really, this is why constitutional monarchy is, I think that it's better than a republic, but constitutional monarchy, which is essentially just a crown republic, is so terrible because the monarchs have no function to serve except as celebrities, right?
I mean, it really depends on the type of constitutional monarchy you're talking about, because if it's like German constitutional monarchy, it's practically more like a crown that on paper has a parliament. In reality, the crown is absolute.
Well, I normally when we refer to that, we can sort of use the unhelpful terms of
I know
semi-constitutional.
it's the cringe British archetype.
Yeah, well, I mean, normally when I say constitutional monarchy, I just mean the king literally does, the king may theoretically have power, but he doesn't have power, right? He's just there for show, and that's really the problem, is that relegating these uh uh, uh relegating the monarchs to uh, relegating the monarchs to just figureheads, as we've done. Essentially, I mean, of course they're going to be messed up. Of course, there's going to be something wrong, and I mean, I'm not saying that every single one is mentally messed up or anything, but of course there's going to be um something wrong with a lot of them, because they have cameras shoved in their face all day, but their influence doesn't, I guess, gain them anything, right? I mean, Boris Johnson may have cameras shoved in his face all day, but at the end of the day, he still gets to dictate some policy, right? I mean, whereas if you're just you're sitting on a throne that doesn't mean anything anymore, and you have cameras shoved in your face, and people are wondering about the latest royal scandal, you're just you're just sitting there, and you can't do anything. So of course you're gonna be messed up in the head. Um,
So, so it's just the classic. It's the degrading of society down to the bare level that the bourgeois have always wanted, because the bourgeois they never were given any power, and they always want to degrade those with power to their level, to be in the dirt to be in the dirt and the scum of the earth as they are. So that's why, frankly, you see all these cameras shoved in the monarch's faces, because they want to degrade the monarch to the level of an average person instead of being a truly divine figure.
yeah, I mean, when Queen Elizabeth, I see the royal family. When I look at, I go to the, the store Meyer. It's a great Michigan institution, Myers. We have, and there's the magazines, right? A checkout, right? Seeing like the British royal family and like the kids, oh, they're they're cute, seeing that, right? It's put on the same level as, celebrity A is getting divorced from celebrity B. The marriage was a record-breaking 2.5 weeks. So hey, for celebrity marriages, that's good. Anyways, if you seeing the monarchy put on that level, it's like nobody gets it, and they don't get it. Okay, I think Prince Charles gets it a little bit, um, but but they just. Nobody understands that these people are supposed to be here to do something. If they truly served no purpose, like they don't serve a purpose now, in terms of
Actually,
actually administering the state. If you make the United Kingdom a crowned republic, okay, then no, if you just make the British a republic and you ditch the royals like openly, nothing would change. um and absolutely nothing would change, except there would be a lot of people who are upset, right? I think the only reason they're kept around is because Parliament learned its lesson from the English Civil War, and removing the monarch would actually cause some resistance.
you
I think that's the only reason they're left. I think that.
and you said that Prince Charles kind of gets it. I actually think that Prince Charles got it a lot. I mean, he led an army in 1745 and almost took the place.
No. I meant the
So we're
current. I
talking
mean the
about
current.
modern Charles.
You were talking modern Charles. No.
We're
Monty Prince Charlie definitely got it.
we're talking about the Lord of Hanover. Got it.
Yeah, we're talking about the
The
Windsor.
Prince of Wales.
Yeah, the current, the next in line after Elizabeth dies.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, he gets it, right? I mean, I mean, like, because there was people were like, oh, he's actually like because he got letters or whatever, like saying, hey, this government department isn't really helping me or whatever, and so he writes the government department and offers them suggestions, right? And he's like, hey, you should do this or whatever, and the department actually does it, and it solves the problem. It's like, that's how a king would act. He's like, hey, agriculture dudes, you try farming like this or whatever. A king is supposed to do that. He's supposed to lead, and he's not even on the throne yet. I mean, obviously, I'm still a Jacobite. I'll be a Jacobite till my dying day. But this guy gets it. Gets it at least a little bit.
There's also the show. I forget its name for the life of me, but it like depicts Charles as king, Charles III, and it's like early on to his reign, he has to dismiss Parliament because they're about to pass a law.
Oh yes, I watched that show. It was one of those PBS shows, wasn't it?
I forget exactly, but
Yeah,
it,
I
it,
remember
it,
watching that a few years ago. It was
I,
interesting.
yeah, I honestly just hope Charles does become king and he fulfills the trope of every single King Charles and just overthrows the Parliament and disbands them.
Parliament is just so. Ugh, no, but I mean, and this is the thing. I don't know how Prince Charles, like, because everything that he had growing up was against him, right? Uh, by the time he was born, England was already pretty Americanized, right? Because like during World War II, a lot of our influence started to come into the British Isles, and people really started to drop things like "God am I right," and and like the merits of monarchy, right? And it wasn't really brought up that much anymore, right? So Charles was sort of born into this environment where the monarchy was truly and honestly just treated as a thing in British culture, a thing that we keep around because we've always had it.
A celebrity piece.
Yeah, a celebrity piece, right? A sort of just like, well, we've always had it. Let's keep it around, right? Rather than recognizing the virtue of having a monarchy, right? They're just So I would love to know, how exactly he managed to avoid like so many constitutional monarchs are around today, and even his own mother, how he has to how he learned that, yeah, you know what, I'm in charge, and I don't think that he's the totally legitimate monarch, but at least I mean, at least, I don't know, I mean, God, I guess I don't know, maybe put him there not as a legitimate monarch, but maybe as a caretaker or something. um but I'm here, um and I have a job to do, you know
And
how did he
he
get that? I mean,
and let's talk about another sort of Jacobite issue here. There are certain Jacobites that I have encountered on the internet that denounce Francis as rightful king because of his public,
Public
um,
sodomy.
yeah.
I
Yeah, I'm actively one of those that just recognizes Prince Max right now.
I
Um, uh,
I mean,
Well,
if there was,
you're Bavarian, so you're
well,
not.
no. I mean, the question is there something in law or precedent that says that we can just depose, like depose? I mean, obviously this didn't obviously this wasn't really a common occurrence. Now was it? But
No, he's actually the first person to ever
come out, like, you know.
Yeah.
But no, I mean the
Oh,
I
suit.
it
mean,
really.
there is that Dutch princess that came out to just saying I forget her name, but she came out as a lesbian or something.
But
Of course, it was the Dutch.
did she
Anyway,
do that before or after?
I think it was roughly around the same time. I forget exactly, but I think they're like the two openly. Oh yeah, we're gay, gay monarchs, I guess, or gay royals.
of course, it was the Dutch, where they have a 92, where
Anyway,
92% of their population accepts gay marriage. Anyways, but
anyway.
no, but I mean the thing is that I don't think there's anything in law that says we can just depose the monarch for that. I mean, is there? Because I mean, if there is, then I'll happily acknowledge Max as the
So,
king. But
so I mean, like technically, if the Pope excommunicated Franz, then yeah, then it would go to Max because the only claimant can be Catholic, and if the papacy would excommunicate Franz, then yeah, that'd be
No,
that.
that, no, 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 not, not to be clear, that is Bavarian succession law, not British
I mean,
succession law.
I
well,
mean
yeah,
that it'd probably
but it would.
apply the same, I would guess.
Yeah, I think that given that sort of most Jacobites are Catholic, we would probably just go off that because we're not particularly fond of having excommunicated people in charge of us, as a general rule. Um, so I mean, but as it stands, the Pope hasn't.
And I just wanted to make perfectly clear here so that we're all so we're all on the same page. The, how do I put this how do I put this delicately? The inclination, the attraction to the same sex itself, what is not inherently, you do not commit a, as far as I'm aware, you do not commit a mortal sin by having an attraction to someone
Of the
of
same sex.
the
It's
same
it's only
sex.
when you
So,
it's only when you
so
act on it.
So I'll bring this up. The fact, like, it's built in to the human psyche that we're, like, especially men attracted to other men. Women, it's kind of a mixed bag. I can't really speak on it, but it's been a thing since Sparta, since Rome, since all these ancient civilizations that they have had these inclinations. Back in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, it wasn't condemned, so it was allowed. In fact, it was encouraged. Like Spartans would engage in sodomy before a battle with their fellow soldiers.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's complicated, but they were also required to have wives. But it's in the natural human psyche to desire those things, but it takes human will um uh to not defile God's image and not commit the act of sodomy. So
Anyway,
Yeah, it's yeah.
so so this is a very complicated, I suppose, issue. However, it's become a lot less complicated because Francis actually did come out and he did pose in a portrait with his partner, I believe.
Partner, quote unquote. No, I mean, but this is, I mean, and this is obviously the thing that obviously, I need to stop saying obviously that people who every
obviously you should stop saying it.
yeah, obviously I should stop saying that. No, I mean everybody is entitled to human dignity because everybody was made in the image and likeness of God. Um, it's just that you can't stand idly by, and you had to say in Christian charity that no, your Highness, this is wrong. And I mean, I don't. We're probably gonna get. We're probably gonna get, if anybody actually listens to this podcast, like and it blows up. We were so getting deleted by YouTube, but whatever. It was fun while it lasted.
I mean, academic agent gets more bandwidth than you guys do, but and he doesn't get deleted, and he says his stuff.
Well, Well, here's
Anyway,
hoping we're around. But I mean, you gotta correct people regardless of whatever sin we're in, and I hope for whatever sins I may routinely fall into, people will lovingly correct me. Is that you have to correct people, because it would be wrong just to let them wallow, I guess, in their own sinfulness. Just like it'd be wrong to let me wallow in my sinfulness or for whatever, and allow any of us, right? I wished that people had told me certain things when I was younger. It would saved me a lot of pain and emotional scar and psychological scarring, right? Um, so it's sort of it would be an act of of charity, or so it's an act of charity to correct people on this. Now I doubt that King Francis will ever actually watch this. I don't even know if the guy speaks English.
Yeah, yes, he does.
Man, everybody in Germany speaks English.
Okay,
Anyway,
so they've been under American hegemony for
yeah,
six
for
decades.
70 years,
Seven.
so 70 something years. Well, yeah, that makes sense. No, I mean, yeah, no, I mean, this is, I mean, this is the thing, and obviously this isn't the best place to say, "Hey, Your Highness," because this is sort of the thing that would be better for a one-on-one sort of dealio. But I never hide, and there's somebody at my school who's gay, and I never hidden the fact that I may say it in a slightly roundabout way of I support all the church's teachings or whatever, and I really shouldn't. I should be more open and honest with that. And Lord, please prevent me from exhibiting cowardice, um, in the face of adversity. But it is something that we have to lovingly correct people on, especially for sins like this, and especially for things that are public scandal and all that, and especially it's I don't know. I mean, I without getting too rambly, well, that's already failed. But without getting any more rambly, I worry about the state of a world where people just accept things for the way they for the as if this is the way it should be, because it's led to absolute moral depravity, and it's hurting more people. um it's hurting people. People are like, oh, do whatever you want for your love or whatever, it's right if it makes you happy or whatnot. It's like that doesn't matter. Like what like happens in this temporal world. What these actions that feel good are not healthy for your soul. You know what a mortal sin is, right? And I mean, it's I just
and for those, and just wanted to give one more quote that I heard from an interlocutor in another server. Quote, Franz fits in the face of every soldier that died at Culloden. I don't know whether I can't speak to the veracity of that claim, but I see exactly where he could potentially be coming from, but we can't know for sure whether those people know or not.
well, no,
I,
I mean
I I
the
I personally say that he spits in the face of every soldier that died at Passchendaele. Um, uh, just because Crown Prince Ruprecht led that battle.
yeah, no, I mean, no, I mean, this is the thing. He is. I guess you could say he is, but I don't think that he really realizes what he's doing. He's openly rejected, saying that it's a hypothetical issue when Parliament was considering making it so Catholics could inherit the throne again, and there was something people were like, well, if that's the case, then it would instantly revert to him, and he said it was a hypothetical issue, but you know the 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 thing is that in a way it's I mean, maybe not our fault as a bunch of 20-year-olds because 18 to 20-year-olds or whatever our age demographic is because we grew up in this world. But the people who
Just blame the boomers. Blame the
yeah
boomers.
no
for
I mean yeah
everything.
I mean it is no I mean it's the he we we're all surrounded by this perverted culture, and that perverted culture is trying to get us to be as perverted as it. Um, and there are a lot of positions that if 5 years ago, I if you had talked to me 5 years ago, I would have been your standard neocon whatever, right? I would have been like, I don't support gay marriage, but I had no reason to say why I don't support gay marriage from a legal standpoint because I still believed in separation of church and state. And I thought, well, obviously we can't have the Catholic Church ruling everything or whatever. And I was your standard neocon, whatever, you know, because that's if I had lived in the 1600, if I had lived in 1500 Europe, everybody would have been like, "What the heck are you on about? Let's build an asylum just for you, there, buddy," because that's not normal. It's not good. It's
No, they call the Inquisition on you.
oh yeah. No,
Because
and
nobody
that's what I
expects the
would have
Spanish
deserved.
Inquisition.
Nobody expects a Spanish. I arrive in medieval France, get the Spanish Inquisition. I wouldn't have expected that. But anyways, no. I mean, and that's what I would have deserved. Because I mean, the ideologies that most people hold today are not normal. I mean, they're normal in the sense that most society agrees with them. But in terms of what's actually true, it's completely out of line with the truth. So I mean, I mean, obviously. So I mean, the fact that we shouldn't be surprised that you know I don't know. We just shouldn't be surprised that this is the way it is, and that we have men in church and state who aren't living up to the ideals that they should be living up to, or living up to what their jobs really and truly are. Um, that that is the way it is, but it's up to us as people who are still alive on this earth to change that. It's up to us to be to try to reform society. It is up to us to live a Catholic life. It is up to us to pray for these people, and it is up to us to be worthy, I guess, to have been somebody to fall a Culloden. It is up to us to be, worthy as somebody who could have hypothetically been a knight and go on the First Crusade. It is up to us to be somebody who would be willing to do some things like to do the same things that Colonel von Stauffenberg had to do. It's up to us to try and be holy men, and so is it, I mean that's I wish I could have come and made that to some grand conclusion because I was doing pretty all right until now.
You were
You know,
doing all right.
yeah.
And we will bring in one of our regular co-hosts, William Stout, to give his thoughts on what we have talked about this evening. First, the trial of Charles I, and then there's all of the Jacobite stuff that followed after. And we also segged into Justice Breyer's retirement. We talked about that for a brief interlude. If you want to give your thoughts on any of those three things, feel free to do so quickly.
Well, I'm not that well informed on the Jacobites in order to give an educated opinion, but as for the Supreme Court Justice retiring, all I have to say is I understand being a Supreme Court Justice is a hard role to fill, and with people living older and older, as we've developed new ways to prolong life and health, I can understand that someone wants to step down from that role at some point.
Okay, and we were game planning that they were going to try to replace Breyer with somebody that is on the left. Some people are even openly advocating for someone who may have spent significant amount of time as a public defender. Some of the more fringe left people are campaigning for that. Your thoughts?
You cut out partway through. Can you say that again?
Oh,
He
sorry.
didn't. No.
Oh, sorry. I said they were campaigning for Justice Breyer to be replaced by someone on the left. Obviously, some of the more to the left people are campaigning for a candidate to be named that one of the things that they're looking for is a portion of their time spent as a public defender. Your thoughts on that?
I'm curious what they mean by public defender.
Like somebody who works in the public defender's office?
Oh, that would be an interesting change of pace. Yeah, that could be nice. Of course, I gotta try and stack it with someone that fits the Biden administration politically. That's a
Given.
Yeah.
assumption, but one interesting thing I could see about it if they do pick a public defender is it would be an interesting change of pace from someone who's used to representing the state, like say a district attorney or a judge, to someone who's used to represent.
Public defenders can become judges later.
Right, right. Yes, of course. But I'm just saying, this is going to have someone who has a different perspective than someone who, say, was a district attorney.
Of course. And that perspective could be a welcome change of pace. However, as we see in several trials that have been going on in the last, I don't even want to say 5 years because it's been longer, of defense attorneys that have essentially been activist attorneys and activist judges that aid defenses more than what would be considered kosher.
Right.
Of course, good point brought up. Defender of suspects, not defender of law and victims. That is from our friend Monsieur K. But Will, if you have any thoughts on the trial of King Charles I, I know you're not really an expert on the Jacobite stuff.
King Charles, by my understanding of what really went on with King Charles, is King Charles wanted to be a more enlightened, absolutist monarch.
Don't say that word. We
Uh,
don't talk about that movement here.
Hey, I like that movement. Thank you very much. But anyway, he wanted to do that, and the Puritan Parliament wasn't having it, primarily because they took a more fanatical approach to Puritanism, and they didn't like the idea of Charles I becoming more lenient and tolerant of Catholics and other non-Puritan Protestants. And so when King Charles decided to rightfully give Parliament the boot, as he should, this absolute, what we would later learn to be a monster of a man named Cromwell, decided he wasn't having it and made an alliance with the House of Orange in the Netherlands to basically overthrow him, form a Protestant puritanical republic, just to realize that Parliament is garbage, just like King Charles did, kick out Parliament and declare himself a hereditary dictator.
It's just
Yeah, and so what are your thoughts on on the actual trial of King Charles I? Like, what do you know about the actual trial?
All I know is at the end of the day, they put an axe to his neck. That's about all I really know.
Okay.
mm,
So do you have any other, how is your, for those of you that might not know, Will was quarantining last week because he tested positive for COVID. How has your COVID recovery gone? And I'm aware you're back at work now. How
Yes,
has that gone?
I've got a lingering cough, and it's not really going away, but other than that, it's doing pretty good. Thank you for asking.
And you're welcome. And I think with that,
Oh well,
we
actually, we'll
let's,
see if Darth has any final words because he
yes,
hasn't gotten to speak in.
I'm good.
you're good. Okay. All right. So I believe it's time that we wrap up. We will wrap up in prayer in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord.
And may the perpetual light shine upon them. May their souls and all the souls of the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace.
In the
Amen.
name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right. Links to everything are in the description, including our Discord server. For those of you watching us on the 31st, we will have a public meeting, I believe, on Sunday, February the 6th, I think, at,
I'll,
at 5:30 Eastern, and you can only take part in that public meeting by joining our Discord server. Link will be in the description, as well as a link to all the rest of our social medias and all the rest of the organization's social media. And our next episode will be a more normal episode to more of what you're used to from us, as we discuss more of the news of the day and provide our own commentary as well what we are. And so with that, if you would like to,
also a little caveat. If any of us have YouTube channels, I know I do. The Darth Kilhoun channel. Why don't you check that out? Let's spread the love of subscribers to each other.
Oh gosh, I'll have to put my stupid
oh yes,
cringe channel
yes,
link in
let
the
us.
description.
Oh yes, yeah, yes, and we can put your channel in the description, Dorf. We have no problem with that. Also, let us also shout out the YouTube channel. I believe it's called Royalist Party of America.
Yeah.
Let's link to that channel. Should be in the description as well. He is part of our server, and he is a member of our server, and he has done some. He has, shall we say, helped us, been a member of our server in some good standing. Now, for those of you that want to listen to this podcast live, we record in our Discord server Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern. And as you know, the videos go up on YouTube on Monday. We will see you on Friday or Monday next week, and we will also hopefully see you on the 6th for the public meeting. So until then, may God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.